Hey guys, this lecture is going to be 2-1. We're going to be going over the basics of Adobe Illustrator. So because Adobe Illustrator is made by the same company as Adobe Photoshop, it's going to have a lot of things that are very similar. So a lot of the things you learned in Photoshop are going to carry over. Similarly, the next software we're going to recap real quick is going to be InDesign. And InDesign, again, is the same company, and it actually has more in common with Illustrator than it does Photoshop. But a lot of the skills you learn here are going to transfer over there, and a lot of the skills you previously learned should transfer here as well. Okay, so we're familiar with this menu just from the Photoshop thing. We've got previously worked on projects here. We've got the ability to open files and new files. So let's go ahead and start a new file. Just like with Photoshop, we have a lot of these presets that exist. We also have custom sizes that we can mess with. We have our settings here to start a new project. So we've got, say, 6 inches by 6 inches is what I'm going to be working with. But there's different things like points, picas, feet, inches, yards, millimeters, etc. So again, just like Photoshop, we have these same settings. What I didn't discuss in Photoshop, because there was kind of a lot going on there, was artboards. I'm going to go ahead and set it to 2 now, and we'll discuss what artboards are once we get in there. We also haven't discussed bleed, which I'm going to more introduce you guys to in InDesign, but be aware that this menu exists. We did discuss RGB color versus CMYK. So again, just as a recap, RGB is going to be if you intend to display digitally, CMYK is if you intend to print. Raster effects. So we talked about the resolution in Photoshop last time. This is going to be a little bit different. Illustrator works with vector graphics, and we'll get also to what those are in a minute. Raster effects determines how it resolves that pixel density out, and that's because pixels and vectors are not the same thing. So we can go ahead and leave this at 300 ppi, and let's go ahead and jump in, and we'll discuss some of those things I kind of rushed through. So last time we were working in Photoshop, we only had the one board. Photoshop does now support multiple artboards. It should, at least. I'm pretty sure it does. So we haven't. What artboards are is this is a workspace, right? This white area is where you can work, and then this gray area is space that isn't part of what will be exported, saved, generated, whatever. Having a second artboard here is really handy for a lot of purposes. Let's say you're designing a business card and you put your client's information on the front. Well, now you don't have to create a second file to create what's on the back. Now you can have the same file hold the front and the back. For you guys, this is more important for when we get to the point where we're designing posters, where you can have, say, 3 or 4 artboards of whatever size you're printing and keep your design and everything coherent through there. There is a little bit of a caveat I would add to that says at a certain point you should probably switch to InDesign. That's just because of the way these different programs work, and the software will slow down at a certain point. So each program kind of has its own uses. Illustrator kind of peaks if you're doing, say, 2 or maybe 3 sheets. Once you get into 4+, you'd want to switch to InDesign, and we'll talk about that when we get to InDesign. So, again, multiple artboards, nice to have, not necessary for some of the stuff we'll be doing here. All right, movement, very similar to Photoshop. It uses a lot of the same tools, so scroll up and down with the mouse wheel to go up and down, hold down Control with the mouse wheel, and you'll go left and right. Scroll with Alt held down, and you will do zoom in and out. Hold down spacebar to get the hand and click to pan, so that'll let you move kind of in and out. And then the zoom is going to be based on where the mouse is right here. So if I want to zoom in on this area, zoom in there. If I want to zoom away from it, I can just kind of do whatever I want with the zoom right there. One of you guys also mentioned that you can hold down Z and scroll left and right, or click and drag left and right. I saw someone using that in class. Not my favorite way to do it, and if I'm going to hold down something, Alt's right next to it. But yes, you can also use Z to zoom in and out with the mouse. Just like Photoshop, we have Control-0, which will zoom you to the current artboard. So if I am clicked over here, it'll zoom me to that artboard. And then Control-1 will do actual size. So the computer kind of knows generally what the screen pixels per inch is. And if you were to take a ruler, you'd probably be able to see that that's just pretty close to whatever I did for the size, which I think was 6 or 7 inches. Finally, If you need to manage your artboards, you can go to Document Setup here and then Edit Artboards. And then if you want to say add one to this, you've got a plus here. The old school way is the plus icon right here, and that'll just let you add artboards. You can also click on an artboard, hit delete, and get rid of the artboard. So you can manage within your document the number of artboards you have, and then I'm just going to hit the escape key to get out of that. Let me actually get down to one, so I'm only working with one here. Okay, so here's our artboard here. We've done movement. Let's talk about fill and stroke. This menu right here, this little set of widgets, in Photoshop, what we had was the foreground, background, switch, and default. That's changed in Illustrator. So what we have right here is what would be called the fill. This is called the stroke. I can switch between the two with X, and whichever one is on top is the one that's currently going to be managed, or its color is going to be managed here. So right now I have the fill. It's showing white with all these settings. If I hit X, it switches to a CMYK black. If I click on a color, it's going to change the stroke color. If I hit X and switch to the fill, it'll switch the color of the fill, and I can switch between those two. D will get you back to the default, which is always going to be white fill, black border. All right. We have a couple other settings down here, including gradient, that will apply a gradient. You can have a couple different types of gradients, and we'll jump into this in a second. But you can have different sort of presets here. You can load your own. You can change, how if it's radial or linear. You can change how it works on the strokes, and then you can change some of the settings here, but we'll jump into how that actually looks in a second. What's important to remember is that and let me throw a rectangle out here. We'll discuss rectangles. We'll discuss kind of some of these other things more in detail in a second. But let's talk about what vectors are. When we were talking about Photoshop, we were talking about the number of pixels, pixels this, pixels that. Everything in Photoshop was pixels. Pixels have a bit of a drawback in that if they're really, really big, or if the artwork is really, really big, it takes a lot of pixels. If the artwork is really, really small, it doesn't. But if you try to go from small to big, you lose that information, or you don't have information there, rather. And so it tries to approximate, but you end up with blurry images, right? Illustrator is different in that these shapes are a mathematical formula. So this is %x versus %y. There's even a menu that shows right there. Oh, no. Not that one. Anyway, so this can be, the advantage of a vector is that this can be scaled infinitely up and down. Don't worry about the stroke right now, but if I have a whole bunch of shapes in here, treat this as a group. Now I do lose, again, I'll talk about the stroke itself. There's a way to handle that later. But more or less, the approximate sort of shape, let's get rid of the fill here. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but I just want to illustrate this for you guys right here. So if this box is that, so if we have these shapes going on, and I take this and I copy it, and then we scale this up really big, proportionally everything here is the same. So what that means is if I take this and put it on my business card that's very small, I can still take that same logo and I can put it on a poster that covers the side of a building, or makes the logo that we put on the front of a building, or whatever it is, right? So vectors, because they're a mathematical formula, can work indefinitely within that space. So you can kind of keep the same graphics that you would use for something small to something very big, which means it's more flexible in terms of generating sort of graphic designs for different things. All right, so that's vectors. How do we create vectors? I've kind of been doing this, but I haven't been telling you guys how I'm doing it. So let's switch to the pen tool. That's going to be the first one right here. And let's draw something. So with the pen tool, you can click around and you can see right there that I'm creating what I'm going to call hard shape or hard corners. They're referred to as, or they're made up of anchors and paths, though. I will probably interchangeably say points at corners or lines as well. So Each of these is going to be something that's sort of just made up of an angle, and you can kind of keep clicking around and make a whole bunch like that. Oops. Right there. With the pen tool, you can also click on something, like click on a line itself. So if I click on that right there, oh, I need to switch. So we're on the pen tool right there. There's the add anchor point, remove anchor point tools within this menu. So if you hit the plus key, you get the add anchor point. So you can click on lines and add anchor points to them. Or you can switch to the minus. So that was plus right there. You can see the plus icon. If I hit the minus key, or we switch to it here in the menu by holding down and clicking on delete anchor point tool, we can remove anchor points. It's probably giving you guys that annoying pop-up. I have mine disabled. All right. The other thing we have is the anchor point tool here, which will let you actually modify the anchor points. And the thing I haven't mentioned with the pen tool yet is that not only can you do hard points like that, you can also click and drag and create soft corners like this. So there's different shapes that you can do by creating this that let you create all kinds of weird shapes that you want, and then Shift C to get the anchor point tool, and you can modify these after the fact. So all these are kind of weighted in different ways that allow you to kind of change how the shape looks. With the anchor point tool, and eventually we'll talk about the direct selection tool in a second here, you can actually also modify these individual points right here, which are called handles. And so if I want to change how these two specific things work, I can drag the handles out. And then if I'm, say, happy with this area right here, but I want this side to change, I can switch in here with the add anchor point tool, put an anchor there, put an anchor there, and then I can kind of modify how this part of this curve works. Generally, you want to keep the number of points you have limited to a certain number, though. Excuse me. So that you don't have just like a bajillion points and you're trying to manage all that. Try and keep things kind of smooth. So let me delete all these here. The pen tool itself is right next to another tool called the Curvature Tool. So if I wanted to, say, let me try and do like a rubber duck shape real quick. That's a terrifying rubber duck. But let's say that's a line that I'm trying to trace. With the pen tool, I could go over that again and get it accurate. The Curvature Tool works in a different way, where if I click on this line, if I was trying to copy this, it's going to kind of alter some of these points after the fact. So some of these don't show up the way that you would expect them to because of the way that these two tools function differently. So I generally don't use the Curvature Tool. I'm going to recommend you guys don't either, because it just kind of, it works in a different way that doesn't seem intuitive to the way that I work, so I don't use it. But I want you guys to be aware of what that is, that it exists right there, so you don't accidentally try and use it. I see that a couple times every semester. So stay away from that Curvature Tool, at least for my lectures. Feel free to try and use it yourself if you want. Okay, let's see. Anchor point tool, add anchor points, remove anchor points. All right, selection. So again, I've been kind of jumping around things here, but and not telling you what I'm doing. So let's talk about selection. If you hit V, that gives you this selection tool right here. This is the generic selection tool. If you were to click on something, anything you click on, you can then drag around to move. If you just click on it, you select it. If you hold down Shift, you add to the selection, and if you hold down Shift and re-click on it, you remove it from the selection. Anytime you select something with direct selection tool, even if it's just like I just get the tiniest bit of that right there, it's going to add this whole shape to the selection. The other option you have is the direct selection tool, and that's going to be the one just to the right of that. This works in a different way. If I click on this, yes, I can kind of select this, but you see that I don't have, like, if I switch back to the selection tool, you can see that I now have this whole scale thing going on that I can use to modify this. But if I switch back to the direct selection tool, I don't have that. So that'll let you hint at kind of which tool you're using at the moment. The direct selection tool only selects what I grab. So if I select this area right here, it's going to grab all the points and lines that are within that area. So if I hit delete, you can see that I get rid of all those things. So using the direct selection tool, if I just, again, narrowly get that area, I'm only deleting this part of this line. So these are two different tools that work in different ways. The other thing that I have is if I click on an individual anchor, I can drag that individual anchor, whereas if I click on the fill, I can drag the whole shape. So again, these are two different tools. They work similarly, but they have different purposes, especially once you kind of get deeper into modeling. All right, moving elements. There's a couple things to cover here. So click and drag lets you move things around. If you hold down the Alt key while doing that, you can actually do a move copy while you're working on it. You also have a couple guides and snaps. So let me get rid of some of these right here. Let me throw in this right here. So I've got a rectangle here, and you can see that there's all these guides and snaps. There's an endpoint guide right there. If I copy this somewhere else and then move this here, it's going to give me a center guide. We've got, oops, let me zoom in here, snap into the other thing. So we've got right there an endpoint guide. This will slide along the endpoint and allow me to kind of keep these two faces together. There's a midpoint guide. So there's a bunch of different guides that you can use in Illustrator. Some kind of exist in Photoshop, but they're not as comprehensive. And this is really handy for kind of snapping things together that are trying to kind of look coherent like that. All right. And so yeah, okay, so move copy, we discussed that. We also have a couple other things too. So if I switch back to the direct selection tool, you can't see it really because it's part of the border, but like this right here, shrink that down with the scale. We can also rotate this. So if I grab right here, we've got the rotate. Hold down shift to snap to 45 or to 45 degree snaps. Yeah. We have another rotate tool that's here in the menu. So if you switch to this, it's going to give you that center point right there that's approximately in the center, and you can rotate around the center. The other option you have is to click somewhere within there, and then you can rotate around that axis. So you can change your rotation axis here. What's also cool about that is you can combine the rotate and the move. So if I have a rotate, let's do this corner right here, click there to place it, hold down Shift and Alt, and I can snap this at 45 degree angles. It gets a little weird there because after you do that once, you have to replace it. So I have to keep clicking and then do the move, the Shift and Alt in order to get that to work. So rotate tool has that, just like the move tool has the Alt holding it down. Let's see. All right, so let's talk about the stroke panel. So let me just draw another shape right here. And the stroke panel is going to be right here. It's these three lines. Again, accessible through that window menu as well. And this is going to give us a couple different options. So let me zoom in here. From the top, we have weight, and we have different points. So we can go thinner, we can go thicker as well. That's going to change how different. Oh, let me convert this anchor point so I can show you a couple things too. So one of the weird things that happens in Illustrator is this. So we have these different caps. Let me draw a line right there. So we've got different caps or ways to handle a cap. So if I've got both of these selected, if I click on this one, it's gonna, or right now the default's this butt cap. So when the line stops, it shoots out stroke width perpendicular to whatever that point is. The cap will round that off to a certain point, and it's also gonna be based on sort of just the radius of the weight. The other option is a projecting cap, which is gonna give me a square end right there. So you do have these settings depending on what you're messing with your strokes. The corners changes how the corners are drawn. So the miter join right here is the default. With the miter join, you sometimes get these sharp angles right here. And at a certain point, some of these angles can become kind of extreme. So if I was to, and you can see right there, it sort of has a cap that it goes off to. So that's because this limit right here is set to 10. If I set this to say 100, it'll go even further, let me see how far I can get that. Yeah, so you can get weird things going on with certain angles with these corners here. Otherwise, you can just set it to a round corner or a bevel join right there. And then obviously, again, the option exists with the miter corner to just set this to a lower value, say like 5, and it'll cap that off just like a standard butt cap right there. We also have a line strokes. So right now, it's always going to default to the center. You can see that with this. Because this one right here is a closed shape, I can click on this align stroke and it'll shift all the stroke to the inside of the shape, and then this one will switch it to the outside. So you have outside, middle, and inside with these settings. The other thing we have here is the dashed line. So by default, this is what the values are going to be, but you can change these and do kind of cool things with it. And let me actually turn on a stroke real quick, just so you guys can see, or sorry, fill, so you can see where the shape is here. So you can do different kind of things like that, where you can have this set up like that. You can have the corners of the stroke itself rounded within this shape. You can do different things with this, like, so let's do a 2 by 2 by, oh wait, where, oh, it does have to be larger than the weight. There we go. Okay. Actually, let's keep that at, let's do 10, and then we'll just do this at 20, 20. And then 20, 20. And so you end up with this sort of pattern series right there. If you want to have, say, a series of dots going around, take your weight and just use that same value. So if I do that, we sort of end up with something similar there. If we cut our dash to half the width, we could get that, and oops, and then let's see, let's do 0, 0 creates points, and then you can have them kind of overlap with a weird pattern like that. Or we do, what is it, 20? No, that's 10 was too close. Yeah, 10's touching. So if you do something like 15, you can end up with kind of like a polka dot shape. And again, here you can see that there's that fill kind of filling in that space right there. Even though this is just a line, it does have a fill applied to it. All right, so that's the stroke panel. There's a couple different, arrowheads. I didn't talk about those. So arrowheads, there's a start and the end of the line. It's always hard to tell kind of which one is which, and half the time I get it wrong because it's a 50-50. Let's go ahead and set this to 10%. No, that's a little small. Let's set this to 30%. So you can add these kind of sort of arrowheads to different things. There's a whole bunch of arrows and different things that you've got within this menu. Sometimes you just want to create like a small, simple pointer or something. Easy enough to just place a line and then set an arrowhead. I say a simple line, like I have this these weird settings. So if we just go to something like that, decrease this to say 60%, now we can point at something with this arrowhead right here, right? We also have the profile here, and the profile I'll get into later, but you can see that it kind of changes the size of the dots. So if I didn't have a fill on this one and we didn't have these arrowheads, you would just see sort of a series of dots that are changing size over the course of this line. And we'll get into kind of some other things there too. Okay, so another thing here is the outline stroke. So let me get, there we go, default, reset this one. Again, default D key. So we have this right here, we have this shape. Let me make the stroke a little bit bigger, and then we have what's called the outline stroke. So if you right click on this, or sorry, no, that one's in the menu. So under here, object, path, outline stroke. And it doesn't look like anything changed, but what just happened when I did that is that it took the stroke, or the fill that was there, and then the stroke that was on the outside, and it converted that stroke to a fill. So if I right click on this, I'll have to ungroup it. Actually, let me do this with a fills with a color. So we've got a fill right there, different color. All right, so object, path, outline stroke. and then we can ungroup this, and now if I drag this out, you can see that here's the fill that existed here, but this stroke has been converted to a its own separate shape. So now if I actually click on this one, we can set the stroke on this to be a stroke, right? So you can kind of do some weird things with that if you want to mess around with it. Same thing with this shape right here. So we can go to Object, Path, Outline, Stroke. Now each of these is its own little thing. Ungroup, and now we can kind of move these around as we need to, give them colors, whatever you want to do with that. So Outline Stroke, very good tool. We will be discussing this a bunch, and I will be highly recommend you guys use this. Let's also talk about the brush panel, which is going to be, I think, this one. And this will be something we'll get into later as well, but you can actually apply different styles to things. Let me do a different shape. Actually, let's do this. Default. Okay. So this applies different styles to things. Again, we'll be jumping into this as well later. But if I have, say, a curvy path like that, it'll do different things kind of depending on what's going on. Really cool tool. So other things just to kind of round everything out. I've been using the rectangle tool, which is M, or it's going to be this box right here. Click and drag to create a rectangle. You can snap to other things when you're doing this, like that. You can also click and it'll give you this box to set width and height if you need a specific dimension. Okay. Within that same menu, if you click and hold on it, you get the rounded rectangle tool. Click and drag to create a rectangle, just like the previous one, but you also get the corner radius option right here. And corner radiuses, I'll jump into those in a second once we get some more shapes out here, but these are just sort of the radiuses that are going on right here. So if I want this to have 1/4 inch radiuses, 0.25 inch, and now I have 1/4 inch radiuses here. Now you can see that I have this same control point right here for this rectangle as I do with this one. And the way to control this is right here. That's when I'm using the direct selection tool though. Get out of there. If I use the, or sorry, that's if I use the selection tool. If I use the direct selection tool and just click on one corner, now I'm modifying just this one corner right there. And it does have a limit as to how far in it'll go. So you can select it with the direct selection or with the selection tool, and then switch to the direct selection tool, click on a corner, and do different things with those. All right. So let's see. The next one's going to be, we're just jumping through more polygons here. So the ellipse tool is next. L is the ellipse tool. Hold down shift if you want it to be a circle, just like with the rectangle tool, get square. Again, all of these are just made up of the same points and lines, so these can be modified in different ways. We can squish that up like that. We can grab some of these points and do different things with them. But yeah, so ellipse tool, again, same idea. Click and set your width and height if you need a specific size. Now, some of these next ones are a little bit more interesting here. We've got the Polygon tool. If I was to click and drag with this, you can see that it's got this 6-sided shape. I can use the up and down keys on the keyboard to change the number of faces, or I can click and I can set it. So let's say I want something with 10 sides. If I go to draw after that, whatever the settings were last time, it will reuse that. So if I do something with 10 sides, or let's say I need something that's got specifically 100 sides and I don't feel like counting, I can say 100, and then you can see that while this, oh no, it does, oh yeah, there it is. So you can see that while I've got that, it's still got individual anchor points for every single one of those points right there. Oops, too far. All right. So that one's interesting, kind of fun. We also have the star tool. So the star tool is effectively the same thing as the polygon tool, except that we have a different option here. So if while I'm drawing this again, I can hit up and down to change the number of points it's got. I can also hold down Control and I can change how far some of these come out. So we can do kind of fun shapes like that right there. And then again, just to loop back to some of the other settings here, we can change, if I switch to the direct selection tool, I can kind of warp these to do something like that. So you can end up with all kinds of different shapes that are there, Or even if I just, you know, kind of pulled this one in. Let's see. Oh, it's not going to play nice with me on that, though. Yeah. So you can do different things with not only just the shape tools that create a generic shape, but then within that with rounding things and whatnot. And rounding tools, even if I do use a polygon to place it, I should still have these same controls on a polygon I drew. So it doesn't have to be created with the Polygon tool. You can just create something and use it. All right, star tool rulers. Rulers we kind of discussed already, but a couple cool tricks worth mentioning here. So Control R to turn them on, right click on them to select the scale that you're using, drag them out and hold down Shift to snap to a spot. Or if you just have, let's say I've got a rectangle right here, you can just drag them and use the guides without Shift to snap to that. Another cool thing that's in Illustrator is if you select one of them, switch to rotate, you see the rotate tool works here. So I can click on this and then I can rotate these around, hold Shift to snap, or let's see, oops. Or, come on, get it. Or I can start a move, snap it to something, and I don't know if that's snapped or not. That looks pretty close. All right, so we've got some shapes now. Let's play around with some things. So I'll go back to, I really like that other shape. So we're gonna do the same shape I made with the star tool, and let's have some fun with round corners. Okay, so we've got this shape right here. Let's talk about the gradient tool. So again, I had mentioned that you can do gradients here, but I didn't really discuss it in depth. So let's go ahead and switch to the fill here. Right now it's this green, but if I click on the gradient tool or click that arrow right there, or the period, it'll switch and apply the gradient. So this is the default gradient right here. We can click on this bar and move it around, and you can see that it kind of changes based on where that gradient is. The gradient tool itself actually lets me choose, click and drag around as well, of how big I want this to look, what angle I want it to happen at, and then we also have those same default settings here, so I can change some of these to different things. With the gradient tool selected, we can also drag some of these settings around. So I can change not only just sort of where the color starts on the gradient, but also kind of where the biases for each section within it are. And we can do kind of stuff like that. Oops, and then of course I screw it up. All right, so there's different things you can mess with the gradient tool right there. You can also, within that space, you can click right there where it had the plus appear and add new colors, double click on a color and you can change it. So if I keep adding things in here, we can just get kind of this weird, crazy, psychedelic looking shape. So gradient tool, it's got some cool settings right there, fun to mess with in a lot of places. All right, eyedropper tool. So let's say I've got this shape right here, and I have my default box right here. Let's say this has all the bells and whistles. So we've got, I didn't do anything to this, but let's go ahead and give it a gradient as well on the stroke. And actually, let's do a different one. So we've got that right there. And let's set the stroke to be super thick so we can see it. Okay, so we've got a lot going on with this, right? So if I have this simple box over here and I try and inherit this, we get some of those settings. But if we have, say, a profile, an arrow, if I was then to take this, use the eyedropper tool, I'm not going to inherit everything from that box, right? I'm going to get the stroke, I'm going to get the fill, but I'm not going to get the stroke profile, I'm not going to get the arrowheads. I believe it does grab the dashed lines. Let's do 10, 10, 0, 0, 0. Yeah, pretty sure it doesn't. Oh, it does get the dashed lines. So looks like arrowheads and below on this menu will not happen if you try and copy, but everything else will come over. And then again, once this is set up, what did I just do? So, oh, okay. we can go in here and modify the gradient. You've got other settings too, like if you want to kind of squish the gradient, you can do that. So that's the gradient tool and the eyedropper. Let's talk about transparency. So we have some transparency going on with that, but we do have this opacity menu right here when things are selected. We can change how opaque this is, so we can change how see-throughable the whole thing is. There's also this other option here, make sure that's on top. If we have full opacity, then we can't see through this. Let me set this to default so we can't see through that. But we can also change some of the settings here for the blend mode. So if we change this to say hard light, we get some weird overlaps right there where this is kind of just merging with the pixels behind it. And you can get some kind of strange effects with that. This is something we didn't really touch in Photoshop, but you do have a whole menu of things here that you can kind of mix and match if you want to get weird with stuff. All right, so layers. So with Photoshop, when we worked with layers, which again is accessible window layers right here, what we had was sort of a layer contained sort of a screen of pixels, right? And within that layer, you could work on different things in that layer, but everything there was sort of one layer. And then we had folders within things and whatnot. So in Illustrator, layers are sort of their own thing. It's kind of hard to explain, but you can see right now I have these layers right now. If I was to copy these around, you can see that everything here stays within this layer. If I create a new layer, nothing goes over it, and I actually have to click on it to work inside of that layer, and we can move things between layers by dragging them. We can also move layers inside of other layers. So each layer is sort of a grouping hierarchy of different things. There's a couple settings here that are similar to Photoshop. So again, we've got the eye here where we can click and turn things on and off individually or as a group. We have a lock here, so we can lock layers if we don't want to if we want to avoid selecting things while we're working around them. We have this little bar right here, or you double click on the layer, and we can choose to rename it there. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, get back there. Okay. So if you double click on a specific top level layer here, you can change the color. So, oops. Yeah. Okay. So if I have, say, this layer, we'll pull this out down here. We can change this to have the lines be, let's say orange, which is going to work great with this colorful thing I have selected. So now you can see that these are orange, but if I grab something from the other layer, this is going to be green. So the color of this layer does reflect the color that the things within it are going to be. We have similar controls for moving up and down within the layer, so things within Illustrator are stacked according to this. So if I move this layer down, I can change the draw order of everything that's here. If I move things up within the layer, what am I selected on? Oh, that's fine, okay. Thought I was on that. All right, so I've got this box right here. Where is it? So I've got this one right here. If I do the same thing with Control and the bracket keys, I can move this up and down within the layers, or Control Shift bracket, and I can move the entire thing. Let's see. And then we also have these boxes right here. So you can see that these are all kind of highlighted right now. If I click on one of these, it'll grab that specific element. So instead of having to search through to get whatever this one is, I can click on this, and then if whatever I need to do, sometimes I can click on it directly. Other times I'll click on something on the top. So that would be a good time to say lock everything else, and now I can click on the lock everything else, and now I can click and drag on the one thing I want to get. Okay. Pathfinder. Let's get rid of all this. Pathfinder is a really cool tool. I use it a whole bunch in my workflow, depending on what I'm doing. That's weird. Okay. All right. So let's say I've got this circle or this rectangle and a circle right here, and what I want is this little kind of semi-wedge thing that's right here. So the Pathfinder has a couple different options. There's the merge right here, so I can unite and it becomes one shape. I can do this one right here, which is the minus front, so whichever of these objects is on the front, it will subtract that from the one in the back. There's this one right here, which is going to be the intersect. What it leaves behind is only the things that overlap, so I can just get that little wedge right there. And then the other one here is the exclude, so anything that overlaps, it gets rid of a fill. So now if I go inside of this, we have nothing in that space. And this would probably make a little bit more sense if I did this with some color so you can see what's actually going on. So, and then the color, I forget what order it selects the color from, but usually I just end up reapplying it. So there's the merge, subtract, overlap, and exclude. And then anytime you do this, whatever you do, generally for the exclude and then some of these lower ones, you'll have to ungroup them afterwards in order to separate them. So some of these others, let me grab some more shapes in here. And we'll kind of illustrate what's going on. So we've got, let's do that right there. Yeah, nice brown. All right. So Pathfinder tool here, we have a couple different options. This one's going to be divide. So this keeps everything in there, but any place there's an overlap, it'll create a line. So now with this, I can ungroup this, and we have all these different shapes that made up that original shape. Similarly, we have trim right here. I forget what trim does. It just gets rid of the lines or the outlines. And then merge, which gets rid of the outlines and then merges them as a group. But again, you can ungroup and simply separate them out. So we have two more tools, and I'm going to throw a circle out here. We'll work with that circle in a minute. But we're going to be working with the text tool, and we have two different types of placements for the text tool. The first one is a click. It'll start the text. You can enter whatever text you want in there. Hit escape to get out. The second one is a click and drag. This creates a box, and it's going to throw some lorem ipsum default text in there, but it'll fill only that box. One of the cool things about the text tool is you have this little tiny square right here, and if you click on that, you can link it to new text areas. So if I have, say, this going on right here, as I add more text, it'll keep filling in to subsequent boxes. So that's really handy when you're putting together, say, a poster, and you have, oops, missed the button there. Okay, so you have a poster and you're trying to just get some content. Come on. Keep missing it. All right, there we go. So then you've got some content lined up in different ways, but you don't want to have to kind of keep working it, doing resetting. So come on. Apparently I cannot click. There we go. Okay. So if you're typing something and at a certain point you can just keep kind of adding text right there, and then it'll just flow through to other areas of the document. I think that's really handy, especially if you have sort of a pre-formatted text or description or something that you want to put in. The other thing that we have is glyphs, and glyphs are found in the glyph menu. You got window, glyphs, oh no, it's under type and glyphs right here, where you have the character window, which is your standard text selection tool. Or like I said, if you switch to Essentials Classic, you have most of those controls up here. So what glyphs are, if we get in here, delete everything, and go to the glyphs panel, is we can choose random characters from the glyphs. So you might not have access or have trouble accessing some of the fonts. You can also select, let's see, different fonts as well. So something I had to do a lot for a while was create different icons for things. So you have a whole bunch of things in here for like a text box. Something else you can do with all text in, oops, let me get this back to a font. And this is a tool that I did I mention? So similar to outline stroke, we have this other tool. If you right click on it, you do create outlines. And so this creates outlines of those shapes. Just like the Pathfinder, let me close this. You have to ungroup to access it, but once you've done that, all of these are now individual letters instead of something that's flexible. But once you do this, you lose the ability to change, say, the font size with this as well. So there's a kind of pro and a con to this. But it means that you can actually just use the glyph menu to create kind of symbols and icons and things that you need to grab. Or you can go in there and sort of get rid of shapes within there and kind of customize some of those things to your own, to whatever you're working on. All right. Last thing we're going to cover. Oh, actually, sorry. I put the circle here for a reason. So what we end up doing a lot of its various points is get rid of the fill. Having text follow a line. So anytime you have a line, you can place the text on it. So typically you'd just have the text on here, right? And if you hold it over, you can see that the cursor has that little squiggly thing going on. So if I click on this, it's now going to exist only on this line, and once it overflows, it's hidden. And anytime you have overflow, you get this little red warning box there. So if we have an arc like this, we can actually place text on the arc. When you do place text on the arc, you have to drag these little handles right here if you want it centered anyway, and then choose it to be centered, and now you can type whatever you want centered. You can also do the same with closed shapes, though it's a little bit trickier. So right there, see how the cursor has like a circle around it? And I don't think it's specific to the shape. I think it's going to go inside of there. So you can get text to fit inside of a shape. Or, let me see. I am blanking right now on if it's going to play nice. No, I think if you want to have a shape like that. Anyway, yeah. So we can put text on all kinds of lines in different ways, but if it's closed shape, it's only going to go on the outside like that. So different ways to place text. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the symbol sprayer. And so let's make a symbol real quick. So I have this little guitar pick looking thing. We have this little club menu right here is the symbols. So if I drag this in here, we'll just create a symbol, export type graphic, centered, whatever. That's fine. So now this symbol is here in this menu. I can delete it from my screen and drag it back on the screen from there. The symbol sprayer tool is this little spray can looking thing right here. And with this selected, I can actually kind of place these out in the workspace. Double clicking on this is going to change some of the settings of the tool. Just like with Photoshop, you can use the bracket keys to adjust the size of this. We can also go in here, change the intensity, density. We have different options as well. So there's these different tool options, and if you hover over or hold down on the button here, you get the shifter, which will let you shift these around. And you can see they're part of this group right here by that highlighted box. These are not individual elements, so while that one is, or whatever's going on with that, these are individual elements, so I cannot select them individually with direct selection tool. They're just one thing. You can use different tools here, like the scruncher, which will scrunch them in. If you hold Alt, it'll reverse it. If you hold the sizer, it'll scale things up. Hold Alt and it'll scale them down. If you do the spinner tool, It will rotate them different directions. If you do the stainer tool, it will not work because I'm on a color, or because I did that black. Let me get a different symbol and oops, spray this one out here. So if we were to do the stainer tool, it would kind of hide things like that. Hold down Alt to kind of bring some of them back. And let's see, screener tool, I believe that just does, if we do a black background here, so the screener tool, oops, the screener tool is going to kind of make them more transparent, whereas the stainer tool is going to, how do I put this? It's different. One works with transparency, and the other one works with kind of making, so those ones got hit by the screener, so if I bring them back, they're kind of, what is it? It kind of makes them transparent versus color gradient. So you can see how some of these are now black and white, whereas others are orange. So there's a difference between the screener and stainer. Style tool applies a style to it. We don't have any graphic style selected, and we're not going to get into that for this. So that should be all for this. I'm going to follow this up with a demo that I would highly recommend you guys follow along with if you have time in class today, where I'm going to copy some logos, and we'll go from there. So I will see you guys in that next lecture.